Hello and welcome to this on-demand webinar for IT leaders to discuss key benefits of a risk-based approach to manage detection and response. This session is produced by Aberdeen Strategy and Research and sponsored by Pondurance. Today's speakers are Derek Brink, Vice President and Research Fellow at Aberdeen, and Johnny Calhoun, Senior Vice President of MDR Operations at Pondurance. I'll hand it over to Derek to get started.
Okay, thank you, Ophelia. Hi, everyone. This is Derek Brink speaking, and I'll introduce myself quickly, and then I'll ask Johnny Calhoun to do the same. I'm with Aberdeen Strategy and Research. I'm a researcher and an analyst here. I've been for many years. We've been part of Spiceworks Ziff Davis since the end of 2020, so a little over 3 years now. And I'm privileged to get to do projects in all areas of cybersecurity and IT and governance and risk management, compliance, that kind of thing. And Johnny Calhoun from Pondurance, you're with us here today too. Say hi and introduce yourself as well.
All right. Thanks for the welcome, Derek. Appreciate it. So Johnny Calhoun from Pondurance. I'm the Senior Vice President of MDR Operations. And I've been at Pondurance about a year now. So coming up on my 1-year anniversary, we're having a lot of fun and working hard to take care of our customers. So my role here is to lead the SOC and the client services team, our TAM team, our SOC engineering program. So anything having to do with MDR operations, that rolls under me. So again, having a lot of fun. And if I can be of help to anyone, please reach out.
That's perfect. And we're going to have I think a really informative conversation today. And I think the listeners will get good value from it. We've just organized it. I mean, it's not scripted or anything. It's just conversational, but there's kind of 5 points of conversation. And so we'll start with the first one. In the title of this webinar, we use the term risk-based. And so I wanted to share some research, Johnny, that we've done recently about risk and how companies invest in cybersecurity. Let me just go to that slide here. We don't have too many slides, but this one requires it, I think. So we'll get the conversation started. The question really about risk is how much risk are we willing to accept, which translates also to how much should we be investing in cybersecurity. And a lot of people want to know how do they compare with others. It's kind of a benchmarking idea. So we at Spiceworks Ziff Davis for over a decade, even longer than Aberdeen's been part of it, have done this study annually called the State of IT. And so this most recent time, we asked questions about how much companies are spending in IT across the 8 high-level categories. We use the standards-based taxonomy. And then if you double-click on those 8 high-level ones, you end up with 84 different subcategories. So what you're looking at here is some analysis I did from that study. And we're looking at cybersecurity spend as a percentage of the total IT spend on computing infrastructure, meaning hardware, software, facilities. So cybersecurity as a percentage of that. So if you spent 100% of your IT budget on cybersecurity, it would be 100% on this chart. Nobody's likely to do that. That's a going out of business strategy. If you spent nothing on cybersecurity, probably also going out of business because you probably end up with a data breach or some kind of downtime. So just to make sure everyone can read this chart if you're not accustomed to it, the x-axis is just what I said, cybersecurity spend as a percentage of the total IT spend in computing infrastructure. So it goes from 0 to 30. And then the y-axis is the percentile. So just like we're used to percentiles if we took a standardized test, at the high end, the upper right, the 95th percentile means that it's 25%. Of your total IT spend is on cybersecurity. That's the high end of this percentile curve. More than 95% of all companies, if you were spending at that level. At the low end, the 5th percentile, so really the low end of this curve is just 1%. And then the median there, which is the 50-50 mark, is about 11%. And just as an example, in the orange box there, if you were spending, for example, say, my company, we spend 6%, that would make you at about the 29th percentile roughly. So this is, just interesting to me, I guess, reality, and you can respond to this. I'll stop talking and right after this. not everybody's the same. People have different appetites for risk, and they spend different amounts, and they have different ability to spend. So this is just a way to say, gosh, represents the range of what we see people spending, and it's not a short range. It's from 1% to 25%. So there's everybody's got room for choices and trade-offs here. What do you think about this?
Yeah, Derek, well said. I mean, talking about trade-offs, and I think when I talk to clients, one of the common questions that comes up is, they ask us, how do I compare to others in my industry, right? Like, what are you guys seeing, right? Because obviously we have, hundreds of customers, and we look at, security across all of these, and we see a lot of different maturities in terms of some are sort of newer in their cybersecurity journey. Others are very mature, right? And so, they've locked down things over years and years and years of practice. And so, I think this is representative of that as well. And I think we see a huge gap here. We're in the range of 1% of their IT spend to 25%. So that's a 25x difference. And so you can imagine, huge differences and disparities in their cybersecurity program, the maturity of it. And so, I think about, as they're on that journey, sometimes you may have to spend more money up front just to get going, and you're fixing a lot of things, or maybe you're bringing in a lot of outside help, and then that tapers off over time, and you sort of settle in to sort of nearly around the median where others are. Or maybe folks are just getting started. So yeah, it's really interesting data to see, and I think it should be very helpful to folks that sort of start to consume this and look at what they're spending on their program and how they compare to their peers.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It changes over time. It's not always. Some companies might just be more risk averse, and so they probably spend more than others, even when they are more mature. And so, there's no one right answer. I guess that's the thing about risk. And just while we're on it, before we move on, Johnny, this is important to me. I think in our space, this is my opinion and my observation. I still see too much of us, as tech professionals. We use terms interchangeably with risk, but it's really not correct. We use threat interchangeably with risk, and vulnerability and exploit interchangeably with risk, and that's just not proper. Risk is only got one definition. There's really no debate about it. It's how likely is something to happen. Let's say, how likely is it that a threat agent will exploit a vulnerability and lead to some adverse consequence? That's what risk is, the likelihood side and also the impact side. So if we're not talking about likelihood and impact, we're not really talking about risk. It's not interchangeable with threat and exploit and so on. So you see, I see you nodding your head that you see the same thing. We're maturing. I think we're maturing as a profession, and we need to keep doing that. But risk has to do with likelihood and impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's great to just continually, beat that drum and, continually to sort of evangelize that message, because, in the past, I've seen a lot of confusion around those topics, but I know that my CISO friends online, I see them constantly sort of, preaching, hey, use good terminology. Here's what we're talking about. We talk about risk, because understanding that term helps us when when our CISOs are talking to the board, or they're speaking to their teams in terms of risk acceptance, risk avoidance, all of those terms. So these words do matter. And absolutely, I think the clarification really helps in terms of helping the dialogue that we need to have around these things. And so it helps to just, helps us to clarify and understand what we're talking about a bit more.
I'm glad you said it the way you did, because it really is essential to communicate effectively to the business decision makers, because they understand these terms. They use these terms all the time. They make decisions about risk every day, day in and day out. Not always about the downside risk, which is what we're mostly concerned with here, but upside opportunities. Those are risks too, because they're not certain. Risk is about uncertainty. So we need to communicate in the language they understand, and that's a language they definitely understand. Well, the next topic that's kind of leads us naturally into it is really just, we talked about choices and trade-offs, Johnny. So I thought we could maybe spend a few minutes talking about some other dimensions that enter into those choices and trade-offs. So I can think of a few here just that we've seen. This doesn't really take research to do this. The threat landscape is ever evolving. Same thing for regulatory compliance landscape, in particular data privacy, but not only that. The recognition that we need not only to protect our resources, but also to detect and respond and recover, should something go wrong, because it probably will. That's obviously where MDR comes in big. And there's competing objectives for IT investments. I mentioned upside opportunities, and there's other things we can do to automate and maybe save cost. Risk is about avoiding costs, not about saving costs. So it might sound like a nuance, but it's a different thing. And then, to some extent, there's been a cybersecurity talent shortage as well. So all of these are dimensions that enter into the choices and trade-offs that lead to make that choice on that curve we were just looking at. So what do you see in these choices and trade-off areas that I've mentioned, and maybe others too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, cybersecurity is such a hard problem to solve. And like you said, for every decision that you make, a lot of times you have a limited budget, going into any particular year, right? And so, you have your existing technology spend, IT spend, existing cybersecurity spend each and every year. And so you have to, not only at the budget owners, they have to justify that spend again each and every year, but a lot of times there's an increase in that spend that needs to happen, right? Because we're trying to, progressively increase our maturity, right? Progressively offset that risk, whether that's through, knowingly accepting it, transferring that risk to some other third party, or just, mitigating that risk as best we can, right? As we all know, there's no true 100% risk elimination. That does not exist. That's not the real world. So it's all about sort of moving that risk to where it needs to go in the proper way. But yeah, there's a lot of trade-offs, and like you said, Derek, the landscape's constantly evolving. So every year it's a different battle in terms of, from a budget perspective. We talk about finance here and focus. So, you really have to understand, I think, every organization, all right, does our current spend make sense, right? And are we putting that spend into the right areas? Are we targeting our highest priority assets first and foremost, right? And think of that in terms of risk profile as well. So do we understand our true risk profile? One of the cool tools that we use at Pondurance, my cyber scorecard, we really start a lot of engagements with that with our clients to really understand, sort of start kind of, at policy first and frameworks and those things, and really look at, okay, what kind of business are we in? Where is our risk? Where do we need to start? And sort of getting that that map or that roadmap rather, to kind of really truly understanding risk, and then how we go about methodically attacking that risk, right? And moving it to where it needs to go. And then having that, from that, developing those playbooks. And then we're informed on where we need to spend and target those higher priority risk. And then the cool thing about the tool is it helps us to actually sort of trend, and you can see in a material way, in a measured way, an empirical way, how you're addressing that risk. So yeah, those are kind of my initial thoughts on that, Derek.
Well, so just to be clear, I'm understanding you right, and also our listeners. This is something that you do at the beginning of a relationship, but also you do it on an ongoing basis too. Is that the proper understanding?
Yeah. Great point. Yeah. Like I was saying, it's, it's sort of a trend. And so it's, at minimum, everyone should be doing an assessment, risk assessment annually, right? And really understanding kind of that snapshot in time, but also as things in your environment, things in the landscape change, whether, is something material changing, or have you acquired a company, if you stood up a new branch office, whatever the case may be, right? There's thousands of scenarios there. But as you hit sort of those inflection points, it's good to sort of do that assessment again, and then sort of compare it to your baseline where you started. And so it's good to have an empirical tool to help measure that.
And again, so I'm clear and everyone can be clear, this assessment that you do is risk as properly defined. Yeah, it includes the connection to the business impact side of things, because that's where they tend to mostly fall down. They're more technical vulnerability assessments, I would say, but you actually connect the two, don't you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cause it's, because if you just take sort of just take an assessment report or just a vulnerability report, and you just kind of dump that on the table, well, what does that really mean? Right. You have a massive amount of data, but you actually, that translation of all this data into meaning, that's absolutely what we're trying to do.
Yeah. You must get great feedback on that, especially after they've seen it for a little while. Get used to it, I imagine.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That kind of leads us naturally into the next kind of segment, which is to talk about, I guess, drivers, not just to care about investments and trade-offs and stuff, but the decision to partner with a trusted service provider like Pondurance. So, again, some of the things we might see in research that won't shock anybody, but the attacks are always changing. They're more varied and sophisticated. It seems like every year, every quarter. Regulatory compliance is the same. We've talked about that already. And I guess I'll mention this one. activities that we do is not the reason that the business people are investing. They're investing in the activities, but they're investing to get the outcomes, which is to manage the risk to an acceptable level. So activities is not equal to outcomes, I guess, is my point. And I think that's to me one of the drivers too that leads people to want to partner. They only have so much resource to invest in activities, and if they can get more expertise, maybe they don't even have, but they can, say with Pondurance that they get the outcomes they really want. So I hope I'm articulate enough on that part of the point to give you a jumping off point there, Johnny.
Yeah, absolutely, Derek. I think when I really love this, from your research, right? That we're making that sort of transition from activity to outcomes, because I've certainly felt that over my career, kind of watching cybersecurity as it's evolved, right, and the things that we've done in the services space. And my team hears me talk about this all the time, right? Just from an execution perspective, that activity does or being busy does not equal being productive, right? Two different things. I love how you've got it worded in terms of activity versus outcome. You can be doing a lot of things. You can stay very busy. You can actually spend a lot of money in cybersecurity, but you may not be moving the needle inside of your business in terms of, again, moving that risk out of the business. So, again, we look at, is outcome should be measurable, right? And not just, okay, we're doing, let's kind of get away from risk, from, sort of risk assessment for a minute, sort of vuln assessments, right? You can do a lot of vulnerability assessment, a lot of pen testing, right? Those are activity-based things, and you get a lot of data and great data and feedback to kind of say, hey, here are the sort of points you need to pay attention to. But then there's a follow-up that needs to come from that, right? Have we programmatically worked to start to, close and mitigate those risks in a very systemic and programmatic way, right? So those are the outcomes that need to be measurable, right? How do we, how did our score change from sort of month to month, so to speak? And so, yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to get, more outcomes in terms of that, again, measurable risk, and how do we look at it on an ongoing basis and see that we're sort of moving that needle. But yeah, I think well said. I love the way that you're sort of phrasing that, because it changes our mindset to go from just going through the motion and doing things to saying, is this measurable, and are we actually achieving things and getting to the results, true results that we want?
Yeah, and we talked about your risk scorecard, which is great. I'm sure there's other, and it's appropriate to have them. We want to measure work progress. We want to report on activities too, but that's a different reporting. In my experience, the board doesn't care that much about the reporting on the activities, the work progress kind of thing. They kind of expect that they're giving you the funds and you're competent and you take care of that. But they want to reporting on, so at the board level, C level, they probably want the risk thing, but it's also appropriate to report on the work progress as well. I'm sure you have it all. Yeah. Don't you do all those things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Can we talk about even to drill down even closer to the relationship that you have with your clients? I'm sure there's a pattern over time of from day one, when maybe you're onboarding them and sort of being more consulting in your approach, to they've been with you for a while, and over time, what we've seen in the research is that in the early days, if all you did was become the source of alerts and just handing them off to people, that just an alert factory, they probably got their hands full handling alerts already. There's alert fatigue we see, but if you can start to offload that and prioritize the ones that are the most important, given the risk assessment that you've done, and over time they allow you to start taking action on their behalf for certain things, and maybe at some point for all things, as a truly a virtual member of their team. That seems to be the pattern that we see. But I'm curious that for you, what pattern do you see typically about how they evolve over time as your partner? You're your mutual partners, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think partnership is key. Anytime an organization is trying to bring in an outsourced provider to come in and help solve a portion of their cybersecurity challenge, right? That's always very key. And there's a lot of trust involved in that, right? And a client is saying, hey, listen, come look at what we've got, right? Look at our challenges, right? Help us, partner with us, and help us to sort of start to close some of these gaps, right? And so, I've seen, and it really depends on the maturity of the client, but I've seen, big swings in maturity of clients by trusting providers, outside providers, to come in and sort of really bring their expertise to bear, right? Because, depending on the size of your company and the budget that you're dealing with, you can't hire a cybersecurity expert in every domain, everywhere that you need someone, right? And so it's cost prohibitive really to try to do that and then maintain that over the long term, right? Like we talked about earlier, Derek, there's sort of the evolving landscapes. There's always new skills coming to bear that we need to have. And then sort of the cybersecurity talent shortage, which has been better in recent years, but still not completely where we need it to be. And then a lot of times, there is, turnover there, right? So folks are moving up rapidly through their career. They're in high demand. And so you can find that talent, but can you keep that talent for the long term? And so there are a lot of advantages that you get day one right out of the box by outsourcing, your cybersecurity challenges to a trusted partner and allowing them to come in and bring the things that they're learning not only in your environment, but across multiple environments and maybe even multiple folks in your industry who are sharing some of the same challenges. And so we can learn from each client and apply those learnings to the entire client base. And so that's really where a company like Pondurance kind of comes to bear. And not only does that happen, in terms of alerting on the MDR side, but from the risk assessment side too, and things that we're seeing with, asset, identification, right, with our bone scans, our pen testing, it all works together with a company like ours to really just take all those lessons learned in a collective way and then apply that and bring that on day one to a new client.
Is there any typical movement through that sort of stages of from just beginning to fully trusted? Does it normally happen? I'm sure everybody's different. It's a silly question, but is there any sort of pattern?
Yeah, it's there probably are a few themes, I would say, not like any necessarily clear pattern, but no, you just see folks start to tighten things up. We bring a lot of times we'll monitor a lot of things. We have a lot of visibility, right, to every part of the organization. And sometimes for programs that are just sort of really reaching that stage of maturity, this may be, the first time, or maybe we have visibility or some technology that a past provider didn't have, or insights. And so we're seeing things for the first time that they haven't, or we're bringing things to them for the first time they maybe have not seen before. And so, you absolutely see them they're tightening the policy, they're reacting, right? And so they have a few things to clean up, and then you see sort of it's sort of loud in the beginning, and then you sort of start to see the volume sort of taper off as they're getting sort of things under control. In extreme cases, right, we come in and clients don't even know they're compromised, and our systems light up like a Christmas tree, so to speak, right? And so then a lot of work goes in, and that's really where the breadth of a provider like us, where our breadth of services really shines, right? Because not only, we talked about My Cyber Scorecard in the beginning, starting out with a risk assessment and sort of getting on the proactive front, identifying those things where we need to go look. But then also, if the worst happens and there is some sort of incident, then we've got those IR capabilities. We've got these just absolute amazing, talented people we can bring in and just get, put those boots on the ground there to really help the client sort of get out of a sticky situation as fast as possible. And so, that breadth of services, I think, really helps. And we've definitely seen clients just, you see the maturity sort of happen in real time along the way. Yeah.
This occurs to me too, just to make sure everyone understands, as they ponder, no pun intended, Pondurance, but do the companies also use you in a more limited sense, and then expand the use over their technical space over time? Is that another pattern of engaging with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely, Derek. We see that happen all the time, actually. So we're connected in ways that allow us, when there is an act of compromise, we're able to, clients come in, they initially work actually with our IR program. Those guys do, Max and his team, they do an amazing job. They come in, those are great guys to work with, very talented. They come in, they help the clients. And then after that, they're like, well, how do we prevent this from happening in the future? right? And then they'll bring in my team, they'll bring in Dustin's team to, we'll bring in the MDR, we'll bring in the risk assessments, right? And so now we've got a more comprehensive suite of services that's going to help that client sort of, one, IR's helping them sort of get out of trouble that they're in. And then now we're sort of being more on the preventative side, catching those things earlier and then preventing them even from happening in the future as best we can.
Right. Okay. That's actually a nice connection to the fifth of the points we wanted to talk about. And in the title of the webinar, we had the term faster. So it has to do with speed. And so I want to show a chart again on this one. We didn't want to have too many charts, but need to show this one. This is I find it fascinating. This is empirical data. It's published for over a decade by Mandiant, who became part of, I think, FireEye, who became part of Google. But they continue to publish this data on attacker dwell time. If you're not familiar, as a listener, the attacker dwell time is just defined as the time between when the attackers compromise our systems until the time that we find out about it, the time that we detect it. So that difference in days is what that x-axis here is on this chart. And on the x-axis, you can see it goes from 0, like we find out about it immediately, to over 2,000, unfortunately, which is over 5 years. That's a long time. And the purple curve is in the most recent report of this empirical data. That's the distribution of the times. And so the median there, as you look at the y-axis, is the 50% mark. So half the time you can see it's very close to 0 days. It's actually in the most recent report, it was 16 days is the median. So at the very high end of that purple curve on the left side, it's in seconds. The dwell time is just seconds, and the median is about 16 days most recently. And then unfortunately, from 16 days, it can go as long as 5 years. And also on the chart, just to explain it, and then we can talk about it. If your eyes are really good, and if you look along the median, I tried to plot since 2011, which is the first time this came out, the median was 416 days. Well, it's a median, 50-50 mark. Half the time it's lower, half the time it's longer. That's over a year. It steadily improved to 243 the following year, 229, 226, and all the way down to most recently just 16. I say just 16, but I think you and I probably both would agree. We probably still want to be faster than that if we can. So this is just all by way of saying it's just a very practical discussion about the value of being faster to detect and respond. And first you have to detect before you can respond and recover. So maybe this sets you up to talk about your capabilities and what you see in terms of speed and so on. Because I just, this is empirical data that people can look at, and maybe it's an eye opener. It was for me the first time I saw it.
Yeah, it's truly telling to see this data and just how long, in the past that these, that we've been exposed and had these threats and environments, right? So the good news, I suppose, is that the dots are moving in the right direction, right? We're sort of, bringing it in closer and closer and closer to sort of that close, ideal real-time detection and response. And so it's good to see that we've sort of moved from in the hundreds to down to 16 days. But none of us are happy with 16 days, right? There's not a cybersecurity practitioner on the planet that says we would be content with that, right? That is definitely not acceptable. And I know folks are working really hard to bring that in, each and every day. And so, again, trending in the right direction. And so, how do we, look at that from, Pondurance's perspective, right? So, actually when folks contract with us and they want our services, we're actually responding to things sort of in hours, not days. And that's really, and as much as possible, we want to get that down to seconds and minutes, right? As much as we can. And so there's proactive things we can do in terms of, configuration management, policies, things of that nature to really do a lot of as much preventative on the front end that we absolutely can, right? Because we don't want to be playing catch up as an incident is occurring, right? Because once it's happened, like you're already behind. And so there's damage. You're now sort of in that damage, control mode. So, for us, again, it starts with sort of in the beginning, configuring things properly, doing good risk assessments, getting out ahead of problems. But once we start talking about sort of monitoring and sort of that, real time sort of look at what's going on inside of our clients' environments, when those alerts pop, we're absolutely jumping on those as fast as we possibly can. There's SLAs that we have to adhere to, this contractual. So we're actually helping clients, bringing all those times down into like, hours and minutes. instead of days. And so, again, another advantage of sort of our whole suite of services, that we can use all those things in unison to really shrink that dwell time to the smallest possible footprint it can be in the most reasonable way.
Yeah, and that's important because I guess we try to tie it back to our correct and proper definition of risk. At that time, when you detect something, the probability is 1. It's happening, right? So
Right.
Really, the value of speed is to cut down the impact, and so that also is a huge important part of managing risk. So yeah, that's I'm glad we spent a little time talking about that. And we only limit ourselves on time because people today want to consume things in moderate bites. But I'm going to put back up, Johnny, our speaker intros, because we had there's a info at Pondurance email there for you, and I have my LinkedIn there if anybody wants to get in touch with me. And I think there's this one site I'll just put up now about more info about Pondurance. If there's any other things you want to say about Pondurance, you can do it here while people look for your website. And I guess there's phone numbers on your website too, which is weird. Not everybody offers those these days. That's pretty good.
Yeah, we try to be that human connection, right? Yeah. So if folks, you really need us, we're just a phone call away. Yeah, check us out at Pondurance.com. We've got all the info on there for you. If you want to email me, I'm always available. You can hit us up at info@Pondurance.com, and our folks will get in touch with me. I'm also available on LinkedIn as well. So if folks want to hit me up with a message there, if that's more convenient, please do so. Reach out. I'd love to connect and see if there's anything that I can do to help, or Pondurance as a whole. We'd love to hear from you. If it's just a question, we'd still love to hear from you. Please reach out. So, and Derek, thank you so much. You've been a great host, and really appreciate all the insights that you brought us today.
Yeah, Johnny, thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. We'd love to bring good information to the audience. And I think we did that today. Johnny, thank you so much. And Ophelia, we're going to go back to you. Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers for sharing their data, insights, and recommendations. Special thanks to Pondurance for making this webinar possible, and thank you for watching. Have a great day, everyone.